forces in Ukraine are training. The entire country of Ukraine has become a sort of a training ground. I can try.
Please, you're almost ready to shoot. You go down.
I'm at the center of Kyiv's Maidan Square. The protesters were fired upon. I'll bring you up to speed with what is turning into the biggest flashpoint in our world today. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Ukraine Direct. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay, and we are broadcasting from the most tense capital in the world right now. This is Kyiv. Behind me is the city's most important landmark, the Independence Square, or as the locals call it, the Maidan. This city is no stranger to wars and revolutions. In fact, we saw the Mongols, the Tsarists, the Soviets, the Democrats. Kyiv has been witness to all. This square has witnessed everything. Today, though, the city is betting on diplomacy. French President Emmanuel Macron is visiting Moscow and he is hoping to persuade Vladimir Putin to stand down. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is also on a diplomatic shuttle. Today he's in Washington, D.C. Then he'll travel to both Moscow and Kyiv. World leaders are banking on the old Churchillian saying, meeting jaw to jaw is better than war. But what if diplomacy fails? Russia has more than 100,000 men waiting at the border. They have come for war. Tanks, missiles, field hospitals, they have everything. Unlike the last time, this Russian buildup is more ominous. The question is, how must Ukraine respond? And to answer this question, we made a short trip to the Obukhov District Military Commissariat. Think of it as a military prep school. Once there, volunteers get special training. How to use firearms, how to battle in sub-zero temperatures. It's as close to the real deal as it gets. We were lucky enough to be part of one of those drills, and this is what we saw. Kyiv is waking up to another morning of sub-zero temperatures as we head to our destination for the day. It's a long, beautiful drive, a city of stunning landscapes, looking poignant under the shadow of war. We are going to meet the men and women who form Ukraine's last line of defense. We are in outer Kyiv and we are going to the Obukhov District Military Commissariat. This is on the outskirts of Kyiv in a satellite city, and we are going to be meeting the troops of the 135th Reserve Battalion of the Ukrainian forces, and we'll see how the troops are training and what kind of weapons they have, because Kyiv, remember, is within striking distance of the Russian forces which are deployed in Belarus, and on a lot of levels the military is preparing to train its troops for any eventuality. In case this conflict escalates into war, how will they take on the Russian forces? We will go and talk to them and see what they're up to. This is the Obukhov District Military Commissariat. This is where the recruits gather to collect arms before they head to the training fields. This morning, they have company. Media from different parts of the world keen to capture Ukraine's preparations for war. The soldiers pick up their assault rifles. They're training to use all kinds of arms, machine guns and heavy weapons that they must know how to operate. The instructors are senior members of the Ukraine Armed Forces. They conduct the war games. Today's session begins with a briefing. This is the District Military Commissariat, and as you can see, the reserve forces are getting ready. They're picking up the weapons here, and they will be going to a training ground where they will train. The Ukrainian government and the Defense Ministry in particular in the month of January announced that they are actively recruiting in the territorial defense forces, and they're looking to build a force of around 130,000 soldiers spread across 25 regions in the country, and we will be seeing how they train. Briefing done, the recruits head to the next destination. This is northern Ukraine, an area tucked away from habitation, covered in sheets of snow. This is what the battlefields closer to the border will be like. The terrain is tricky, the weather is punishing, but the soldiers know how to keep their spirits high. This is Ukraine preparing for war to the tunes of Aerosmith. This is the the reservist force, and they're getting ready for their drills. It's snowing here, and people are very excited, and they're getting ready, and they're pulling their weapons out, and we're going to see how they train as they prepare to take on the mighty Russian military. Kitted out in camouflage and equipped with guns and ammo, the soldiers line up. Resisting a Russian invasion is no mean feat. The Ukrainian forces know this. They're both outmatched and outnumbered. Ukraine versus Russia is essentially a David versus Goliath battle. There is no comparison. You look at any parameter. The Ukrainians have 200,000 odd active military personnel. The Russians have more than 900,000. Same with the reserve forces. The Russians have more than twice over. Artillery, 2,000 for Ukraine, 7,500 for the Russians. 12,000 armored vehicles in the Ukrainian military, 30,000 with the Russians. Attack helicopters, 34, 544. Fighter aircraft, 98, 1,500. And defense budget, the Ukrainians have less than $6 billion. The Russians have more than 61 billion. Like I said, there is no comparison, but that's not the only basis on which wars are won. There are many other factors that go into it, and the Ukrainians are a proud people. They want to defend their country. To make up for the gaps, Ukraine is accelerating the development of its territorial defense forces. The aim is to have a corps of 10,000 regular full-time troops. When fully mobilized, the force would be 130,000 strong. They're happy to recruit anyone who believes in their cause. The soldiers even try to train this reporter, but figure she's better off armed with a mic.
So let's imagine you are our first day recruit, and we're going to teach you some basics. So first of all, this is the gun. This is Kalashnikov. So here you go. Yeah, it's a Kalashnikov. It's AK-74.
AK-74. Okay.
So yeah, first the main rule: you never point it to the person.
Okay.
You always point it out of the person. So the first thing we're going to do is shooting stand. And first of all, and you never put your finger on the trigger. So always try to hit it right here, just in case. So you need to pull your body a little bit up front.
Okay. Like this?
And yes, and yeah.
Okay.
Push the stock against your shoulder. Yeah, right here. Put a little bit down.
Okay.
Yeah, and put this thing up to your eye so you can see where the person is. So now you're almost ready to shoot, but you need to remove your finger from here.
Okay.
First time when you see your enemy, the main thing is that he doesn't hit you. Remove your finger.
Okay.
So in order for him to not be able to remove it, you need to make yourself as small as possible. So the first thing you do, you go down. You go down to your knee. Yeah, exactly. Now it's more difficult to hit you. You need to go even lower. So you put your hand here, and then your leg goes around your other leg, like that.
I'm not sure I can do that, but I'll watch you do it.
But anyways, this is the main thing that we teach in order for recruits to be ready.
One recruit down, they resume their training. The drills are as close to an actual combat as they can get. The soldiers learn how to fire weapons, negotiate the terrain, practice battleground maneuvers, use their surroundings to their advantage, and launch a coordinated attack. Who can join the reserve force? Anyone between 18 to 60 years of age. All Ukrainian citizens qualify, plus foreigners who have lived in Ukraine for at least 5 years. The applicants clear medical, psychological and professional tests before being inducted. This force has 150 battalions. The one charged with defending Kyiv is the 135th Battalion. This one. They're training hard to defend their capital and key infrastructure in the event of an invasion. They're driven and committed. They say they do not want a war, but they'll fight one if it comes to that. Do you think there'll be war?
Honestly, I don't think there is going to be war because Putin lost the momentum. He was gathering the forces and he didn't attack. Right now, Ukraine gets more and more weapons, Ukraine gets more and more trained. So the longer he waits, the more difficult for him will be to enter Ukraine and to stay in Ukraine. However, Putin is quite is a crazy person, and you cannot you don't know what's coming into mind of crazy person. So he might be he might attack just because he wants to attack, just because he wants the war, not because he thinks that he can win. So yeah, we need to be ready. As it says, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, you have to be prepared for war.
Yeah. Volodymyr Halaiko, aka my trainer, is a regular participant in these drills. Halaiko believes the territorial defense forces have an edge over the Russians. They know the lay of the land. It's critical to winning wars. Combined with weapon skills, he says it's a lethal combination. For world powers, Ukraine is a geopolitical war. But for these people, it's an existential battle. It has forced them to leave their day jobs behind, don combat fatigues, and hit the training fields. They say to avert a war, you must be ready to fight one. These men and women embody the resilience of Ukraine and the commitment of its people. As the day progresses, the weather becomes harsher. Most of the international journalists have long left. It's snowing again. By the time we finish recording, we are frozen to the bone. But what we carry back with us is the warmth of Ukraine's spirit. With the WION team in northern Ukraine, this is Palki Sharma Upadhyay. So Ukraine is well prepared. Their volunteers are training hard. Their arsenal is well stocked. If war breaks out, Ukraine is not backing down. Having said that, the focus is still on diplomacy, resolving this crisis without guns. World leaders are shuttling between capitals as we speak. Emmanuel Macron, like we told you, is in Moscow. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is visiting Washington, D.C. After meeting President Biden, Scholz will also travel to Moscow and Kyiv. Clearly, European leaders are working overtime, but Macron and Scholz have different missions. Scholz is looking for an image makeover. He is facing the heat at home in Berlin. Some Germans are calling him the invisible chancellor. So Scholz wants to show that he is a team player and that he's 100% committed.
Wir sind sehr konkret übrigens auch in dem, was wir tun.
We are very concrete, by the way, also in what we do for defense in NATO, in Europe, in the European Union, in continental Europe. We are the country with the highest defense contribution. Nobody should overlook that. In recent years, we have massively expanded the capabilities of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Minister war und wir werden in dieser Haltung weitermachen.
Macron is not seeking an image makeover. He is seeking a publicity boost. The French president loves to play the consummate diplomat. He's done that in Western Africa, he's done that in Lebanon, and now he hopes to do it in Russia. Macron hopes that he can convince Vladimir Putin to de-escalate, but it's a risky mission, and if it fails, it is going to be a major embarrassment in an election year. If he succeeds, though, it could get him re-elected in the month of April, so it's a high-stakes mission for the president of France. How does the Kremlin perceive this visit, though? With caution. Moscow welcomed Macron's attempts to broker peace, but like most of us covering this visit, they're not expecting any breakthrough. At most, there could be a delay. In fact, that is Macron's backup plan. If an outright resolution is not possible, then buy time. But his partners across the Atlantic are more bearish. I'm talking about the United States of America. American officials have released a new assessment of the situation, and it's bad news for Ukraine. US officials say that Russia has mobilized 70% of its troops. What does that mean? You see, for any invasion, you need adequate military resources, say X number of soldiers, Y number of tanks. Around 70% of that deployment on the Russian side is complete. What will happen if Putin invades in February? US intel reports say that Ukraine will fall, that the city of Kyiv, this city, could be captured in 48 to 72 hours, and around 50,000 civilians could die. That is the American assessment. Now, just to be clear, this is what the Americans are saying. But if you ask the Ukrainians, it's all baseless doomsday predictions. Here's what their foreign minister tweeted. Do not believe in the apocalyptic predictions. Today, Ukraine has a strong army, unprecedented international support, and Ukrainians' is faith in their country. It's all propaganda. America wants to keep the NATO alert. Ukraine wants to keep the morale high. But all sides agree on one thing. Preparation is key. Well, here's how Russia is preparing with massive military drills in Belarus. They're flying long-range nuclear bombers. They have brought the Sukhoi ground attack jets. Overseeing all of this is the Russian defense minister, Vladimir Putin's right-hand man. In the Western camp, America is also making moves. Their elite soldiers have arrived in Poland. We're talking about 1,700 of them, and leading them is a special commander, Major General Christopher Donahue. Does the name sound familiar? Well, it should. Because Donahue was the last US soldier to be evacuated from Afghanistan. And that pretty much sums up NATO policy. A lot of symbolism, but little substance. Right now, 4 foreign ministers are in Kyiv. The German, the Czech, the Slovak and the Austrian foreign ministers. It's a morale booster for Ukraine. But morale does not fire missiles. It cannot win you wars. Not alone. Last-minute military shipments may not be enough to defend Ukraine. Most intel reports corroborate this, that Ukraine will be overwhelmed, overpowered, but invading and occupying are two different things. Ask George Bush. Putin will face a full-fledged insurgency if he invades Ukraine, and that is keeping his fingers away from the red button. It's not for nothing that this is being compared to a world war. This conflict is being shaped in different capitals of the world, and WION has correspondents tracking this story from all sides. Tonight we'll take you to Moscow, Brussels and Washington, D.C. with our correspondents Julia Chapman, Rosie Burchard and Simon Marks. Julia, let's start with you. The president of France is in Moscow. Russia has limited expectations. Do you see this visit dialing down the tensions, if not resolving the situation?
We're expecting a change in the rhetoric from the French government when it comes to engaging with Russia, a change in comparison to that of countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, among others. Emmanuel Macron says that he believes a deal can be reached with Russia. Other countries haven't been quite so optimistic about that. President Macron, in an interview to a French newspaper, said that he wouldn't be leaving Russia without any kind of signal that there could be a de-escalation. But he also pointed out that Russia deserves respect. He said that Russia has a right to raise its own security concerns. And he will be speaking with President Vladimir Putin about ways that Europe can at least meet Russia halfway. So there could be some kind of compromise that he is looking to forge. Whether or not he has unity from other European leaders remains unclear. But certainly there are concerns that he is too willing to make concessions to Moscow.
Simon, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is visiting Washington, D.C. Tell us what's expected in his meeting with Joe Biden.
This is an absolutely vital meeting between the US and German leaders, and it comes at a time of substantial tension in the relationship between Washington and Berlin, even though President Biden insists that the US and Germany are absolutely standing shoulder to shoulder as they prepare for a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine. Behind the scenes, there are substantial disagreements between Germany and Washington, and the two leaders are going to try and address some of those here today. Those disagreements focus on some of the sanctions that the Biden administration is planning to impose against Russia if Vladimir Putin orders an invasion of Ukraine. Specifically, the Germans are pushing back against the idea of banning Russian financial institutions from SWIFT. That's the big interbank exchange that is absolutely crucial for financial institutions if they want to carry on being able to transfer money around the world. The Germans don't like that idea at all, but also there will be an intensity of focus on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. That's the pipeline that is planned. It's built already. It just needs to be tested and given regulatory approval before it is switched on so that it can deliver substantial supplies of natural gas from Russia to Germany and to the rest of Europe. The Biden administration is threatening to reimpose sanctions over Nord Stream 2 if the Russians invade Ukraine, and the Germans are very concerned about that prospect because Germany and the rest of Europe is so reliant on imports of gas from Russia, particularly during the chilly annual winter period. So both of those issues are substantial fissures in the relationship between Washington and Berlin, but the relationship has also been damaged by Germany's insistence that it's not going to provide lethal aid to Ukraine, weaponry supplies from Germany. The German government says it's upholding a long-standing tradition of not selling weapons into an environment where hostilities could soon break out. I think when the two leaders hold their joint press conference, we're going to see once again a projection of unity. But the question is, will they succeed in actually achieving it, or will it simply be another projection? Because certainly at the moment there is substantial frustration within the Biden administration about the actions and statements of the German government.
Rosie, the military buildup continues in Ukraine. The Belgian army has put its troops on standby. How much can talks deliver in a situation like this? Is the window for diplomacy shrinking?
French President Emmanuel Macron certainly thinks that window of opportunity is still open. He's heading to Russia for some crunch talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And ahead of those talks, French President Macron said he did hope that there would be a solution in sight. Now, Macron seems to be really casting himself as a leader here when it comes to trying to diffuse these tensions and pursuing diplomacy. He seems to be also the kind of protagonist of NATO's dual track approach. So that dual track is deterrence on the one hand, but dialogue on the other. And he is championing dialogue today. Now, remember, one of those things they might be discussing is some proposals NATO has made to Russia on places they could perhaps find common ground. So, for example, on arms control, on greater coordination on military exercises. And other allies and EU member states will be watching closely today to see if there can be any common ground found. But this is a very unpredictable situation, and it's really unclear where these talks are going to land and whether or not diplomacy is going to succeed, or indeed, if in this case, diplomacy is going to fail.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Gravitas Ukraine Direct. And earlier today, I interviewed two individuals who've been tracking this conflict very closely, two experts, Petro Burkovsky, a strategic studies analyst based in Kyiv, and Alexander Krebet. He's an editor at a Ukrainian newspaper, and I asked them whether the ongoing talks are going to change the course of events. What are their expectations? The reason why Ukraine's allies don't seem to be on the same page, and Moscow's primary motives in this dispute. Is this just about Ukraine's NATO membership, or is there more to this than meets the eye? Here's what they told me. Let me ask you first. We've seen a lot of diplomacy since this morning, and we're going to see it for the rest of the week. The Russians have already said that they do not expect one meeting to change the course of events. What are your expectations from the meetings that are happening in Moscow and Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think that the Russia has now three options. It has either to deliver its threat and invade Ukraine in order to show that it's serious about its threats. Secondly, it has to increase the tensions without giving up negotiations. And third, which also is possible and likely, is that they should pretend that they've got already what they wanted, and they would say that they would de-escalate. So right now, the old diplomacy of the Western world, of the United States, of the France, of the Germany, is aimed at persuading Russians not to start the war because of the severe economic consequences for its economy, and because Ukraine would not be left alone, that Ukraine would be helped and would be heavily assisted by the West in a military way. And right now, I think that it's time for diplomacy, another chance to persuade Vladimir Putin not to attack Ukraine, because it would lead to his own detriment.
Do you believe that Ukraine thinks it will not be left alone?
For sure, the last situation and the meetings we are having here and abroad is proving this. We are not alone, and today the Western support of Ukraine is at the top level since we regain our independence.
I've been reading a lot of commentary on what Russia is doing and why it's doing, what are the motives of Moscow, and some say that this is not even about the NATO membership. Even if Ukraine were to freeze the NATO membership for another decade, Moscow will not leave Kyiv alone. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I agree, because we have seen it for the last 8 years that any efforts that Ukraine has made to stop the war and some kind of reasonable conditions of the peace resolution it proposed to Russia, they all have been rejected. And what we have seen from the Russian history is that Vladimir Putin tries to reinvent the Russian Empire, to restore the Russian Empire. And Ukraine, in the past times, Ukraine was the jewel in the crown of the Russian Empire. But our message from Ukraine is that forget about Russian Empire, it's in the past. And if you will continue to attack Ukraine, if you will continue to destabilize Ukraine, it can only bring the end of your regime. And we are very pleased, and we are really pleased that right now this opinion is also shared by most of our Western partners. If in 2014 they doubted that Ukraine can sustain a Russian invasion, right now they are pretty sure that Ukraine would defend itself and would defend not only its own sovereignty and freedom, but also defend the neighbors who are also being intimidated by Russia.
When you speak of your Western partners, from my understanding, I don't think they're all on the same page. We heard the Germans saying that America's effort to pull Ukraine in its own sphere of influence is creating instability in Europe, and we know that Olaf Scholz is in Washington, D.C. to shore up his image as much as to express support. Do you believe in that German assessment that the Americans are adding to the instability?
I don't think so, because the Germans, usually they are partners with Russia. They have a historic ties with Russia. And Olaf Scholz is going to Washington, so they are going to talk about the sanctions and not lifting the sanctions, but imposing new sanctions on the pipeline Nord Stream 2, just in case Russia will invade again Ukraine. So, and of course they are not on the same page, but the majority of the Western allies within the NATO are on the Ukrainian side.
If you allow me, I will just compare the German policy to the current morning in the Kyiv. It's chilling wind and you feel it, but the sun starts burning more and more and heating us more and more. That means in Germany we also are seeing the change of their position. They still do not want to supply arms to Ukraine, but today I think today will be the meeting between the German chancellor and the president of the United States, and I think the key issue would be brought to the table, that the Nord Stream 2, the main pipeline which supplies gas to Germany, would be halted and would be stopped if Russia decides to invade Ukraine, and that would mean the end for the Russian strategy of dividing Europe and making Germany a privileged partner. So really we expect that this would be on the table and Germany finally would make a right decision.
Final question, what do you make of the American assessment that Kyiv will fall in 48 to 72 hours?
I think we should think about it, but we also should remember that Americans thought that Afghanistan would stay for a month or 3 months, and it fall just within the weeks. So we are not Afghanistan. We have a very long history of fighting against Russia. We have a history of fighting Russians and their troops in Donbass. So we will never surrender, and it won't happen in 72 hours, of course.
For sure, it will not have. They will not take the Kyiv within 72 hours because the Russian troops, they didn't manage to take the Donetsk airport, which is just in the same amount of the kilometers from the Russian border, but in the east of Ukraine. So they took only the debris of the Donetsk airport within more than 240 days. So it's impossible for the Russian army to take the Kyiv within 72 hours. Just, no.
Your optimism is inspiring. Thank you very much, Petro Alexander, for talking to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for India's interest in us.
Right behind me is the Independence Square in Kyiv, also called the Maidan, the site of the Euromaidan protests in the winter of 2013. That's when the country was gripped by a wave of civil unrest. People were protesting against their then president, Viktor Yanukovych, a man who wanted to take Ukraine away from European integration and push it closer to Russia. The people of Ukraine launched a revolution against this. They ousted their president. Lives were lost. Here's the story of the Euromaidan, how it changed Ukraine and how its people remember it 8 years on. This was the moment that triggered the breakup of Ukraine. Bullets flying all around and hitting unarmed protesters. By the time it was over, at least 50 people had died. 8 years have passed and the boards around me keep the memories of those deadly times alive. I'm at the center of Kyiv's Maidan Square, the site of the Euromaidan protests, and look around me, there are boards everywhere and they tell the stories of those protests. They tell the stories of the revolution of dignity and how Ukrainians suffered during the Euromaidan protests. There were snipers in all of these buildings surrounding the Maidan, and protesters were fired upon, lives were lost. It was an inflection point for Ukraine. The country was on a pro-European trajectory. Ukrainians wanted a tight integration with the European Union. But suddenly, the planned agreement was scuttled. The pro-Russian president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, backed out of the EU Eastern Partnership program at the last moment. The citizens of Ukraine were up in arms. The Euromaidan protests led to his ouster. The Ukrainian government was overthrown. Yanukovych fled to Russia. This was in February 2014. 1 week later, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an invasion of Crimea. It was a major loss for Ukraine. A part of their territory was taken away by force, the Crimean Peninsula. And close to the center of this Maidan are pictures of those who were killed during the Revolution of Dignity. The Russians orchestrated a referendum. Armed men oversaw a vote where 97% of the people of Crimea supported a so-called reunification with Russia. There were no international observers. The West rubbished the referendum, imposed sanctions on Russia, and threw it out of the G8. But for Ukraine, the problem was not over. Russian-backed separatists in the Donbas region demanded independence from Ukraine. The war in Donbas has claimed more than 14,000 lives since 2014. And negotiations over Donbas, mediated by the Europeans, collapsed last year. The message from Moscow is clear. Kyiv joining the NATO is a red line for them. But for the people of Ukraine, this is not just about politics and security equations. This is about self-determination. This is about their revolution of dignity. The Maidan has become a symbol of revolution, a reminder of the time when Ukrainians tried to walk out of the shadow of erstwhile Soviet Union, when Ukrainians tried to assert their sovereignty. And that shift came at a very heavy price for Ukraine. People lost their loved ones, but they also found their voice. And they're speaking in that voice today, and they're saying that if the Russians come this time, they're prepared to fight. This is Palki Sharma Upadhyay, reporting from Kyiv, Ukraine, for WION World is One. And as we track the story here in Ukraine, we're also looking at what's happening in Beijing. The Winter Olympics are underway. The Games kicked off on Friday. We told you about it. It's just been 48 hours. And the event has already been marred by a number of controversies. One world leader who attended the opening ceremony has tested positive. A number of infections have been reported inside the Olympic bubble, close to 400 at last count. Infected athletes are sharing horror stories from quarantine camps, and the Chinese state media is doing what it does best: deflect and distract. Is any of it working? Our next report tells you.
China expected the Winter Olympics to redeem its image, but barely 48 hours since the Games kicked off, they're already proving to be disastrous. A head of state has tested positive for the Wuhan virus, James Marape, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea. He landed in Beijing on Thursday to attend the opening ceremony, but was forced to return shortly after catching the Wuhan virus. The news has embarrassed not just China, but also the International Olympic Committee. They failed to deliver on their promise of a safe and successful Winter Olympics. Cases within Beijing's bubble are exploding. 45 new infections were reported on Saturday, 10 on Sunday, and 24 in the last 24 hours. The virus is not the only horror story in Beijing. Infected athletes and staff are complaining about the arrangements. Bad food, dirty rooms, poor internet, and no training equipment, they say. Kim Meilemans is a skeleton racer from Belgium. She had tested positive in January this year and was again declared infected on landing in Beijing. In a tearful video posted on Instagram, the 25-year-old shared her ordeal in China's quarantine camps.
Sent out of the isolation facility. We thought this meant I was allowed to return to the Olympic Village and will be treated maximum as a close contact. On the way to the village, we did not turn to the village, but the ambulance went to another facility where I am now.
Valeria Vasnetsova is a Russian biathlon competitor. Last week, she posted this on Instagram. China is serving inedible food in quarantine, she said. Her account has since gone private. The organizers are scrambling to control the damage. The Chinese state media is hoping distractions will work. Enter Eileen Gu, a Chinese-American skier based in San Francisco. She decided to play for China and not the United States, and the Chinese press made her the poster girl of the Games. They're calling her an idol for all athletes with dual nationalities. Also making news is Peng Shuai, the Chinese tennis star who recently accused China's former vice premier of sexual assault. Beijing has extracted another denial from her. The 36-year-old player has reiterated that she was misunderstood. The timing of her statement is curious, or not if you join the dots and study China's propaganda playbook.
From China, let's go straight to Canada, where a state of emergency has been declared in the capital city of Ottawa. The city's mayor says the situation has gone out of control and he's warned of a possible crackdown in the most impacted neighborhoods. But the protesters refuse to back down. Large-scale demonstrations are being reported in Quebec, Toronto and parts of Alberta. They're finding support from influential figures, including the likes of Elon Musk. Here's a report.
These images are from Ottawa's Parliament Hill, the foremost governmental precinct in Canada. Currently, it's under an indefinite gridlock. Truckers from all over the country have blocked several key avenues here. They've parked their big rigs on the streets and set up temporary shacks on walkways, paralyzing the area and halting all movement. This has forced the mayor of Ottawa to take a drastic step. He has declared a state of emergency. In a statement released on Sunday, he said that the demonstrators have outnumbered police officials, posing a serious threat to the safety and security of local residents. He says the situation has gone out of control and has warned of a possible crackdown in the most impacted neighborhoods. 97 investigations into criminal offences have already been opened. 450 tickets have been issued to the truckers for violating law and order. Yet the protests continue to spread. In Toronto, Canada's financial hub, civilians have descended on the streets to express solidarity with the truckers.
I support the truckers because they're standing up for freedom. Our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has been violated in many, many ways. We're not allowed to cross the border. We're not allowed to go on planes or trains. We've been fired from jobs. And these are all rights that we have as Canadians, and we need them back immediately.
In Quebec, protesters have blocked roads leading to Canada's National Assembly. They were seen chanting Liberté or freedom amid the sound of blaring horns.
I encourage people who want their freedom back. Instead of investing in the media, they should invest in a better health system. That is what I think. I'm here today to fight for my children's freedom and against masks in classrooms. We can't breathe as well with a mask. We want to tell the government these measures make us sick.
In the province of Alberta, cowboys have joined the protesters in several locations. They were seen waving Canadian flags on horseback, calling upon the government to remove all COVID restrictions. Meanwhile, GoFundMe, an online fundraising platform, has blocked $10 million in donations to the protesters. The organization has cited violence and unlawful activity to halt the funds that were meant for the organizers of the Freedom Convoy. This decision has provoked a strong response from Tesla CEO Elon Musk. Musk called the platform a professional thief that had double standards Last week, former US President Donald Trump expressed solidarity with the protesters. He has now issued another statement, calling Justin Trudeau a far-left lunatic. Last we checked, Trudeau was still in hiding at an undisclosed location.
There's a new trend on Indian Twitter, #boycott Hyundai, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Indian Twitter users are calling for a boycott of Hyundai cars. I'll tell you why. On the 5th of this month, Hyundai Pakistan tweeted this. It was a call for Kashmir's freedom. The same message was sent on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Indian users were livid. This was not corporate activism or political messaging. This was open bias. Hyundai was openly siding with the separatists in Kashmir. But why now? Because the 5th of February is observed as Kashmir Day, Kashmir Solidarity Day in Pakistan. It's actually a public holiday there. So Hyundai thought, why not cash in? Why not score some woke brownie points? Except Hyundai forgot their history. They waded into a controversy with no basic research, no understanding of the politics, no grasp of the background. They thought they saw an opportunity and they pounced. And frankly, I'm not surprised. Companies are desperate to be seen as politically active nowadays, and that's not a bad thing. Corporate responsibility is important, but equally important is picking the right causes. The conflict in Kashmir dates back to 1947. Hyundai's home country, South Korea, was formed 1 year later, and Hyundai, the motor company, was founded 20 years later. And I'm not saying that age is a factor here. I'm saying awareness is, and awareness comes from experience and research. In this case, Hyundai had neither. Once the pushback began on Twitter, Hyundai lost their nerve. The parent company released a clarification. This is what it says. The unsolicited social media post linking Hyundai Motor India is offending our unparalleled commitment and service to this great country. India is the second home to the Hyundai brand. All those words, but the most important one was missing. Sorry. Hyundai's statement was a clarification. It was not an apology. They need to take action against the people behind the social media post. And this is not just political advice, this is financial advice. Hyundai is the second most selling brand in India. Last month they sold more than 40,000 vehicles. If Hyundai wants to retain that customer trust, it will have to act. If not, they will set off a dangerous corporate trend. In fact, it's already happening. It wasn't just Hyundai that started this Kashmir campaign. Other brands are doing the same. Like Kia Motors, another Korean car maker, KFC, the American fast food chain, also Pizza Hut, another US food chain. All three brands have demanded Kashmiri freedom. Now, we can think of two possibilities here. One is ignorance. These foreign brands make good products, but their general awareness is zero. Hence, their social media campaigns. And two, a deliberate conspiracy. Someone is using the brand's hyper-local campaigns to celebrate Kashmir Solidarity Day. Either way, action must come from the top. Hyundai must use this opportunity to send out a message. Corporate responsibility is good, but wayward political campaigns are not, especially in such sensitive and complex issues. We saw another example of this last year. You might remember this. The Ben & Jerry row in Israel. The ice cream company decided to stop selling in the West Bank. Again, it's a case of half-baked activism. These companies have massive internal issues to solve. I'm talking about wage gaps. I'm talking about lack of women leadership at the top, toxic workplace atmosphere, greenhouse gas emissions. But no, Hyundai, Kia, KFC, Pizza Hut, they all want to resolve a 75-year-old conflict, and that too without understanding the nuances. So here's a message to companies around the world. If you're sending political messages, make sure you do your homework, do your research, make sure you pick the right side. If not, governments may or may not punish you, but your customers most certainly will. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Ukraine Direct. We are leaving you with Gravitas Global Headlines. Thanks very much for watching. See you tomorrow.
Iraq's parliament has indefinitely postponed the presidential election. Only 58 of the 329 lawmakers showed up after major political blocs had announced a boycott of the vote. US President Joe Biden spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett on the phone, discussing the nuclear talks, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and a visit to Israel later this year. The White House said the two leaders discussed the shared security and other challenges in the region, including the threat posed by Iran and its proxies. India has granted emergency use permission to Russia's single-dose Sputnik Light COVID vaccine, making it the 9th vaccine to be granted restricted use approval. Sri Lankan Foreign Minister G.L. Paris is on a 3-day visit to India. India's External Affairs S. Jaishankar held bilateral talks with his Sri Lankan counterpart. The meet focused on strengthening bilateral ties. Mexico has broken up a makeshift camp housing close to 400 migrants near the U.S. border amid deplorable conditions inside the camp. Australia will be opening up its borders for fully vaccinated international travelers this month.
Your visa is one thing, but your entry into Australia requires you also to be double vaccinated.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison has announced the reopening of its borders to vaccinated tourists and other visa holders for the first time in almost 2 years. Days after frozen bodies of migrants were discovered near the Greek border, hundreds protested against migrant pushbacks and border violence in Athens, blaming Greece's border policy. According to police officials, 700 people marched in front of the Greek parliament. At least 100 people were killed and nearly 48,000 were displaced as Cyclone Batsirai caused widespread destruction in Madagascar. The cyclone made landfall on the island's eastern coast. Senegal have been crowned Africa Cup of Nations champions for the first time ever after victory over Egypt in the final. The final pitted two of the continent's biggest stars against each other in Liverpool, teammates Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah. After a goalless 120 minutes, Mane struck the decisive penalty to seal the victory. Speed skater Irene Wust has become the first athlete to win an individual gold medal at 5 different Olympics by retaining her 1500-meter title in Beijing. The 35-year-old Dutch woman set an Olympic record for a 6th career Olympic gold medal and record-extending 12th speed skating medal.